They called her the Mad Queen of Madagascar, a bloodthirsty tyrant who terrorized her people. Yet what if I told you that this so-called mad woman was actually one of Africa's most brilliant strategic minds, who successfully kept European colonizers at bay for over 3 decades when most of the continent was falling under imperial control? Meet Queen Ranavalona I, the iron-willed monarch who transformed Madagascar into an impenetrable fortress against European invasion during the height of the colonial scramble for Africa. Born around 1778 as Rabodo Andrian Ampoini Marina, she lived in an era when European powers were carving up Africa like a feast, claiming territories and enslaving populations with ruthless efficiency. By the early 1800s, the British and French were locked in a deadly competition for global dominance. Madagascar, the world's 4th largest island, sat like a strategic jewel in the Indian Ocean, perfectly positioned along crucial trade routes between Europe, Asia, and the African mainland. Its ports could serve as naval bases, its resources could fuel industrial empires, and its people could provide cheap labor for colonial enterprises. When Ranavalona ascended to the throne in 1828, after her husband King Radama I died unexpectedly, Madagascar stood at a crossroads. Her predecessor had welcomed European missionaries and traders, allowing them to establish schools, introduce new technologies, and convert thousands to Christianity. The London Missionary Society had even developed a written form of the Malagasy language and translated the Bible. But Ranavalona saw through this seemingly benevolent facade. She understood that missionaries were often the advance guard of colonial conquest, softening up local populations with promises of salvation while paving the way for political and economic domination. She'd witnessed how European influence had already begun fragmenting traditional Malagasy society, creating divisions between Christian converts and those who maintained ancestral beliefs. Within months of taking power, the new queen began implementing a radical reversal of her husband's policies. She expelled most European missionaries and traders, banned the practice of Christianity among her subjects, and closed the schools that taught European languages and customs. Foreign visitors were required to obtain special permits, and many were simply turned away at the ports. This wasn't the impulsive decision of an unhinged ruler, but rather a calculated strategy to preserve Malagasy independence and cultural identity. Ranavalona had studied the fate of other African kingdoms that had embraced European influence, watching as they gradually lost their sovereignty and became colonial puppets. Her first major test came in 1829 when British and French forces attempted to establish permanent military bases on the island. Rather than meet them in conventional warfare where European weapons and tactics held advantages, Ranavalona employed guerrilla strategies that exploited Madagascar's challenging geography. Her forces used the island's dense forests, treacherous swamps, and mountainous terrain to launch surprise attacks before melting back into the landscape. She also weaponized Madagascar's tropical diseases against invading forces. European soldiers, lacking immunity to malaria and other endemic illnesses, died in staggering numbers. Some military expeditions lost over half their men to disease before ever engaging Malagasy forces in combat. Ranavalona deliberately avoided providing medical assistance to Europeans, understanding that their biological vulnerability was one of her greatest strategic assets. But the Queen's resistance strategy extended far beyond military tactics. She launched an ambitious program to reduce Madagascar's dependence on European trade and technology. Local artisans were encouraged to develop indigenous alternatives to imported goods. Traditional farming methods were promoted over European agricultural techniques that required imported seeds and tools. Ranavalona also established her own arms manufacturing industry, hiring skilled craftsmen to produce weapons that could compete with European firearms. She understood that technological independence was crucial for maintaining political independence. By 1835, Malagasy workshops were producing muskets, cannons, and gunpowder that rivaled European quality. Her educational policies reflected this same strategic thinking. While she banned European-style schools, she expanded traditional Malagasy education systems that preserved local knowledge, customs, and values. She recognized that cultural colonization often preceded political colonization, and she was determined to prevent both. The Queen's methods were undeniably harsh. She employed a legal system called tangina, which used a poisonous ordeal to determine guilt or innocence in criminal cases. Those accused of crimes, particularly those suspected of Christian sympathies or European collaboration, were forced to consume portions of the tangina nut. Survival was interpreted as proof of innocence, while death indicated guilt. Modern estimates suggest that tens of thousands died under this system during Ranavalona's reign. European observers used these deaths to paint her as a bloodthirsty monster, but context matters. This was an era when European colonial powers were enslaving millions of Africans, conducting genocidal campaigns against indigenous populations, and imposing their rule through systematic violence. Ranavalona's harsh justice system served multiple purposes beyond determining guilt. It created a climate of fear that discouraged collaboration with European influences. It also reinforced traditional Malagasy spiritual beliefs at a time when Christianity was gaining converts. The Tangina ordeal was rooted in ancestral religious practices that emphasized divine judgment and spiritual purification. Despite the international condemnation of her methods, Ranavalona's strategy proved remarkably effective. While European powers were establishing colonies across Africa, during the mid-1800s, Madagascar remained fiercely independent. The island's economy grew stronger as local industries developed. Its military became increasingly sophisticated and well-equipped. The Queen also proved herself a shrewd diplomat when circumstances required. She occasionally allowed limited European trade when it served Malagasy interests, but always on her terms. She played British and French interests against each other, preventing either power from gaining dominant influence. One lesser-known aspect of Ranavalona's reign was her promotion of women's rights and education. Unlike many contemporary societies, her administration included numerous women in important governmental positions. She established schools specifically for training female administrators and military leaders, understanding that women's participation strengthened her resistance movement. As one contemporary observer noted, she governs her kingdom with an iron hand, but it is a hand that has kept Madagascar free when all around her kingdoms fall to European domination. This quote captures the essential paradox of her legacy: harsh methods employed in service of a just cause. The Queen's reign lasted until her death in 1861, spanning over 3 decades of successful resistance to European colonization. Her immediate successors initially attempted to continue her policies, but gradually Madagascar began opening to European influence once again. By 1896, 35 years after Ranavalona's death, Madagascar finally fell under French colonial rule. The island remained a French colony until gaining independence in 1960. This timeline demonstrates just how effective her resistance had been. She had delayed Madagascar's colonization by nearly 4 decades during the peak period of European imperial expansion. Today, Ranavalona I is increasingly recognized as one of Africa's great anti-colonial leaders. Her story resonates in our modern world, where questions of cultural preservation, technological independence, and resistance to external domination remain relevant. She demonstrated that smaller nations could successfully resist much larger powers through strategic thinking, cultural unity, and unwavering determination. Her legacy challenges us to reconsider how we evaluate historical figures who employed harsh methods in pursuit of noble goals. In an era when European colonialism was devastating African societies, Ranavalona stood as a beacon of resistance, proving that independence was possible even against overwhelming odds. The Mad Queen of Madagascar was perhaps the sanest ruler of her time, understanding exactly what was at stake and fighting with everything she had to preserve her people's freedom.